Our first thread of the day is titled, If You Can Make the Same Amount of Money. My husband makes a lot more money than me, and when I ask him to do something, like for instance, wake up at 10 a.m. on Saturday instead of 1 p.m., his response is, ask me to do that when you can make the same amount of money. We have a kid, and I don't want to jump to conversations or divorce, but I'm curious of what you would do. I want to start by saying I think that she typoed there, and what she means is that she doesn't want to jump to conversations of divorce, which makes sense. It would be a little bit overkill to try to divorce your husband over this type of problem. But otherwise, I think the problem kind of makes sense. In general, there's obviously a complete lack of context in this thread. So we don't understand exactly why, if you take it purely at face value, if he says, hey, he doesn't want to wake up at 10 a.m. on Saturday instead of at 1 p.m., then I'm pretty sure anyone with half a brain cell will go, what the hell, that's completely ridiculous. Now, if you add a little bit of context to that, like, for example, he works a night shift or he has a late evening shift, and therefore his sleeping in time is kind of part of his sleep time, then obviously the situation changes quite a lot and the request becomes a much higher one. There is some element where, I mean, there's kind of two sides to this. One side is, yes, he is kind of holding being a higher earner over her head, and that's not good for their relationship. The other side, though, is this total lack of context, because there are very many different ways, or there are very many different reasons this kind of statement could have come out. So, for example, he could be worried about the state of their finances and frustrated that he has to work so hard in order to earn so much money. He could be he could be frustrated at the relationship itself. A lot of marriages will have this kind of dynamic where the wife is much more of a spender than the husband is, and so the husband's bringing in a lot of money, but then the wife is spending it without paying attention to what she's spending it on, and that's causing the conflict. So if the two partners here are not on the same page with regards to finances and how they're spending, it could be that he feels like he's already contributing a lot to the house, to the household, and she, for whatever reason, he feels that she isn't contributing as much. So maybe, for example, even though she earns a lot less, he's paying for everything and nothing in the house is ever done, and he's paying for daycare, etc., 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 right? There are a million different scenarios that I could think of off the top of my head that kind of explain, or that could excuse it to some extent, the response here, or the comment here from the husband. All that said, it says to me that their relationship is in a bad place because you're not actually talking about the underlying issue. Now, that's one side to it. The other side is that he's just totally unreasonable and he doesn't want to invest any time in doing things around the house, and he has a completely messed up understanding of the idea of being married to someone, i.e. that you're joined together, and therefore you are both equally responsible for your household, you're both equally responsible for your kids, you're both equally responsible for your financial situation, and so on and so forth. That this is a joint responsibility, it is not a responsibility on one party or the other. That said, I do think this source of frustration usually comes from one person feeling like they are contributing more than the other person, or feeling like they're contributing in a way that they don't want to contribute. So, for example, if he doesn't want, like if he's working 80-hour weeks and he doesn't want to work that much, but the only way that he would be able to work less is if she took on more work. You know, there's always a balance there that needs to be reached between both people. And so if I were OP, what I would do would be wait until the situation has blown over, because that is not a good, don't give a snappy response back immediately after he says that. That's not a good way of dealing with it. The best way to deal with it would be to sit down at a separate point in time and say, hey, you know, when I asked you to do X and I thought I was asking for something quite reasonable, you instead got snappy at me and you said this statement, and that statement gave me the impression that you don't think that I'm contributing to the house. Why do you think that? What's going on? And then you can talk about it. And that is a perfectly reasonable way of dealing with this situation. I would not even consider divorce. Like the fact that she even said, hey, I don't want to jump to conversations of divorce, says to me that she probably has hung out quite a lot around this forum, because that's a fairly common piece of advice that people give. But yeah, definitely over the top. To go to some of the comments, I'm going to skip a couple. As you can tell, everyone's probably going to be on her side. One person says, "This is so disrespectful. I've heard of people adding up how much it would cost to replace them in terms of workload. A live-in nanny, someone who buys and cooks groceries, a daily maid. That would be playing this game of tit for tat. But the bigger question is what he thinks his responsibilities are as a parent, and if he genuinely believes that bringing more money in equals getting to dictate how things are run in your home. I would feel so unappreciated with a comment like that, and I would lose a lot of respect for my husband if he ever said something like that." I think this person is quite fair. Yes, of course, you would feel unappreciated with a comment like that. But I think that if that is coming from the position where he's not seeing your contribution to the house, or there is a totally imbalanced contribution to the household, then that would explain why he would say something like that. And it's honestly quite hard to be appreciative enough in a relationship, and in my opinion anyway. I think both parties will often do quite a lot that goes unnoticed, and then both parties will always notice quite a lot that isn't done. And that is then the source of the conflict. That is then the source of the arguments that they have with each other. Hey, you didn't take the trash out, but maybe he was doing something else. The response of, hey, I've heard of people adding up how much it would cost to replace them. In my opinion, this suggests, number one, that she thinks OP is a stay-at-home mom, which is not what she said. She says she is working. She's just earning less. And here we also don't know, like maybe she's only working part-time and that's why she's earning so much less, or maybe they're just in totally different fields and that's why that's happening. But I would not go down the road of, hey, look at all of the things that I do in the home and imagine how much you would have to pay someone to do all of these things as well. I think that if you're kind of just taking the conversation in a place that's just not very constructive and not very helpful for both of you. It is very much this tit for tat kind of thing. If you go into your marriage with the expectation that you can really aim to do everything exactly 50-50, then you're probably going to fail, because there will be periods of time when one partner is doing X more and the other partner is doing Y more, and then that might switch for whatever period of time. But you cannot go into it with the expectation of, oh, okay, if I'm doing this and you have to do this for me. Maybe think about marriage more from the perspective of giving and trying to give more. And he would definitely benefit from that as well, right? Like he wouldn't come up with this type of statement if that was how he approached it mentally as well. The next comment here that I wanted to read says, yeah, that's super condescending on his part. You can go to the super passive aggressive route and stop doing his laundry, whatever else. Remind him that his salary is just one part of many that goes into what it takes to run a household and live a certain lifestyle. The only way he gets a pass here is if he just got off like a 70-hour work week trying to meet a deadline and he needs to sleep. Then I think you got to let him get a day of rest. But even if that's the case, he should have said that to you instead of playing the I make more than you card. If he wants to champion himself as the money bag and that's it, let it be known there are bigger money bags out there. Now, what's really funny about this comment is she's actually right about a lot of things, or he's right about a lot of things, but also wrong about a lot of things at the same time. So if you say the super passive aggressive route of not doing his laundry, like that's not helpful either. Like, the moment you hear yourself say the words, just be super passive aggressive instead, you know that you're not helping. If you don't want to kind of spiral down into divorce, then this is not a good piece of advice. And then the second comment, yeah, he might get a pass here if he just had this particular circumstance or a situation that resulted in him needing that. Then I think you got to let him get a day of rest, this person says, which is, yeah, fair enough. Under certain circumstances, the point that he needs more time to sleep is fair enough. And still, this person is completely right that he should have found a different way to communicate that. A lot of these comments come out in these knee-jerk types of responses when people are just really frustrated in the moment, and then they say something, and that something is motivated by like resentment and anger, and that's not helpful either. You know, that's not a good way for him to communicate with you either, of course. So yes, he should have said, hey, look, I'm really tired. I needed those hours of sleep for these reasons. Would it be okay if I don't wake up early on this particular day, and I can promise to take on more of the load on a different day, or whatever else. That's a much better way of interacting with your loved ones than being angry at them. And then I really hate this final comment that this person says, which is, if he wants to champion himself as the money bag and that's it, then let it be known that there are bigger money bags out there. That is not a good attitude for any mother with kids to have. You should definitely want to try to preserve your relationship as much as possible. And it's much better for the kids to be there with their biological parents rather than to have this kind of blended family setup, which causes a whole host of different problems. That's number one. Number two, the amount of confidence that you would need to find a better man who is richer than your current husband, who was happy to take on another man's child and so on, is really not that high. So I just wouldn't have this thought. And I think it's a really unhealthy and really unhelpful thought to have when you have any kind of conflict within your marriage. Looking at the conflict itself, it's not a conflict that's at the end of the world. Everyone else, by the way, in the comments says, oh my God, he wants to sleep in until 1 p.m. Is he a parent? Yeah, fair enough. Obviously, like I said, if you take these things at face value, then the way that OP wrote it, it makes it very difficult to take the husband's side, but you can also immediately tell that there's a ton of context that's missing here. And so OP, it's much, much better to simply talk to your husband at a different time and to ask him why he's so frustrated and why he's so angry if this is something that you don't know, and to try and get at the source of the frustration. And then maybe after all of that, you can tell him, hey, it wasn't really cool that you talked to me like that. Maybe next time you can say something else instead.